Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatih wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah as Allah deserves. Have taqwa of Allah as the majesty of Allah deserves, and die not except in the state of Islam. For this khutbah, and inshallah if you've heard this before, it'll be a beneficial reminder. I want to begin with the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the company of his companions, and he asked them a question. He said, "Who is the bankrupt person?" And this was very common for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he would ask about definitions of words that generally people knew about. But what he was doing is he was redefining the word. So for example, another example of this, the Prophet ﷺ once asked, do you know who the wealthy person is, the rich person? They said, Allah and His Messenger know best. And the Prophet ﷺ said, it is the one that does not, listen to this definition very carefully. It is the one that does not desire any more than what they have. Meaning, you could have a few dollars in your bank account and be by definition rich. Because you want nothing more than what you have, you're content. And you could have billions of dollars and be by definition poor. Because richness, wealth, is not wanting. If you went to someone, you said, here's some money. He said, I have more than I need. You're like, oh, they must be rich. They are rich. If they're content with what Allah has given them. There was that story in the mid-2000s when the financial crisis happened, the stock market crash, that there was a man in England, I forgot where actually, somewhere in Europe, he was worth several billions of dollars. And in one day he lost like 5-6 billion. He still had 2-3 billion left. And he stepped in front of a train. Right? And he killed himself. He was by definition feeling poor, irregardless of what he had financially, right? So the Prophet ﷺ would redefine terms. The Prophet ﷺ would say, do you know who the successful person is? And then he would define it, which is different than our notion of success. I was just giving a khutbah in McLean earlier today, and for that audience specifically, it may be applicable here. We were talking about that definition as it relates to children. It's not, we don't have harmonious spirituality if we believe that we are only judged by intentions, but we judge our children by results. There's some issue in our understanding. If we say, Ya Allah, we make so many mistakes, please judge us with mercy based on our intentions. Innamal a'malu binniyat, deeds are by intentions. And then with children, how'd you do in school? If you got an A, you're rewarded. If you get a B, you're not rewarded. Actually, at least where I come from, my culture, in brown culture, a B is like a D or F. You might as well just drop out of school. If you get a B, it's like, God forbid. But that's not spiritual. That's not spiritually aligned with the principle of intentions. So the Prophet ﷺ would redefine concepts that we have in our minds of wealth. An example, modesty. Right? We know that headscarf is part of modesty, fine. But the flag is not the same as the castle. The headscarf is a flag of modesty. It indicates modesty. It is not modesty itself. So when people say, for example, we hear this with marriage, the topic of marriage a lot. These definitions have to change. They'll say, is she a good person? Yeah, mashallah, she wears hijab. One, we've made headscarf the entire hijab. So that someone can say, she took off her hijab. As if you can take off modesty. So you've taken one part of it, which is important. Headscarf is part of hijab, for sure. I'm not saying it's not. But to redefine it as all of it is a problem. Or you'll say, what about that brother? Oh, mashallah, he prays 5 times a day. Suddenly, a physical action, which may be an indication of religiosity, becomes religiosity in itself. So the Prophet ﷺ will redefine these terms. The Quran will redefine these terms, that what Allah is looking for is qalbun salim, a good, sound heart. It doesn't mean Sharia is not important. It doesn't mean following the rules in worship is not important. It's very important. It's essential to our deen. But we don't skew our definitions. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ, in the topic of this khutbah, he said, do you know who the bankrupt person is on the Day of Judgment? The companion said, Allah and His Messenger know best, as they would, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah and the Prophet ﷺ know best. The Prophet ﷺ said, and this I'll give you a summary of the hadith for the purpose of this khutbah. He said, the bankrupt person is the person who arrives on the day of judgment thinking that they are rich with good deeds. Hear this carefully. Is everyone with me? The bankrupt person is the person who arrives on the day of judgment believing that they are rich with good deeds. Every time in their life, there was a crossroad. And there was a path of what Allah wanted for that person. What would make Allah happy. And the path of what Allah disliked. This person went down the path of what would make Allah happy. Yet they're bankrupt. When it came to their external actions, they always obeyed. And so they enter onto the day of judgment with a confidence that is actually a false confidence. They are expecting mountains of good deeds. And the Prophet ﷺ describes that when this person enters upon the day of judgment, they find a mountain of good deeds. So up to now because we know the ending of the story, the setup doesn't seem to make sense. Even when they were young, they would sacrifice following what other people were doing that was disobeying Allah to do what was obeying Allah. They see their mountain of good deeds. Yet Rasulullah ﷺ is calling them bankrupt. Finally, they go and they approach their good deeds. And as they get close, the good deeds vanish like a mirage. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses this person. And may Allah protect us from being in this state. This could be any one of us that's being spoken of. May Allah protect us from that. When they approach their good deeds and their good deeds vanish, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses this person that you did a lifetime of good actions, but not one of them were for me. Not one of them were for me. Okay? The intentions behind the actions, that intentions animate actions with light. Without them, their actions, they're devoid of light. An example, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was this group of people called the Khawarij. These were people, they would embarrass you with the amount of worship they would do. They would put people to shame. You do a little, they'll do this much. They'll fast more. They will pray more. In every aspect of what we consider Islam, they will go above and beyond everyone else. Yet, their worship did not cleanse their hearts. It did not enter here. It stayed out here. As the Prophet ﷺ said, اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَيْثُمَا كُنْتُمْ وَأَتْبَعُوا السَّيِّئَةَ حَسَنَةً تَمْحُوهَا وَخَلِقِ النَّاسَ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. Have taqwa of Allah wherever you are. Follow up a bad deed with a good deed. You'll be forgiven. It'll erase it. But in the last part, وَخَلَقِ النَّاسَ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. And treat people in the best way possible. There is a religion that we think we are connected to heaven and we cause mischief on earth, and it's not true Islam. We're drinking the wrong Kool-Aid. The strange thing about this deen is, you could have someone in the community that is viewed as the most righteous. And in every act of worship, they are. And Allah could know, it's like the poem by T.S. Eliot, that these are the hollow men. These are the stuffed men. Scarecrow Islam. Looks like Islam, inside is hollow. And what fills up our deen, makes it real? Intentions. When the Prophet ﷺ says deeds are judged by intentions, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that judged by is an interpretation. I want everyone to be with me on this. The translation of that hadith being deeds are judged by intentions is an interpretation. That's one way to interpret it. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ literally means deeds are intentions. So one of the interpretations, understandings of the hadith is, all we are doing is creating our intentions. That's all. Allah is helping us have actions based on our intentions. We don't create actions, but we create the intention behind it. right? And so we know that on the Day of Judgment, our entire scale of good deeds and bad deeds, what will be most relevant in understanding that scale of good deeds and bad deeds will be that we will only receive the good deeds for actions that were intended for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's very scary, because the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't fear shirk and kufr for my ummah. What I fear is hypocrisy. For someone who has already given their shahada and they believe, the danger for us is that we're not sincere. Not that we don't have a general idea of Islam or belief. And the problem is, the munafiqs, the hypocrites, are lower than the rejectors in hellfire. I'm saying this to realign us. Myself first. You know, I love teaching seerah and I love reading seerah. Since I was a kid, studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ was always the most enjoyable part of Islam for me. And it's my favorite thing to share also now. And whenever I read, if you go to collections of hadith like Sahih Muslim, you will see chapters in Sahih Muslim, which is considered the second most authentic compilation of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, after Sahih Bukhari. Right? And the difference is, both of them were extremely authentic. Imam Bukhari just went through one additional level of authentication that Muslim didn't. But each of them was a lifetime effort of collecting these hadith, and we owe a lot to these people, to Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari. When you read Sahih Muslim, you will see chapters where they will have merits of companions. And this point is very critical. So if you are with me, just don't miss this point. This is very, very critical. When we learn about the merits of the people who came before us, we are reading about their actions. But as we learned, and of course the companions were sincere. The Prophet ﷺ was the most sincere. So this is not saying that they were not sincere. But when we hear about the person who was bankrupt, the issue with them was not their actions, it was their intentions. On the opposite side then, what made Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, Fatima, may Allah be pleased, Khadija, Ali, Uthman, all these, Omar, Abu, all these great companions, what made them so amazing, we read about their great stories. One, the stories that we're reading is only 1% of their good deeds, because most of their good deeds, they hid it. So it never made it into the books. No one ever knew except Allah that they were doing those good deeds. Once in a while, someone would see them doing it and write it down. So one, even the actions of their goodness is 1% of what they were doing. Are you with me? Everyone with me? That's the first point. The second point, though, is we are reading their actions. There is no book that lists the intentions behind those actions. And that's actually what made them who they were. It was not just that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would go to the blind woman and he would clean her bathroom, as we had mentioned. He would feed her with his blessed hand. It was actually the mercy and the love that he felt towards her when he did it. It's not just to take care of our parents and be dutiful to them. It's actually the empathy that we feel towards them and the sincerity we have in front of Allah when we do it that gives the action its worth. And this is where it gets very interesting. Two people could be feeding the homeless. One person could be getting sins. Three people. One person could be getting sins while they feed the homeless, because they're doing it to show off. They look down on them. As they're feeding them, they say, oh, I'm so much better than this person. They may even remind them later, which is a big sin. Oh, you remember that time I fed you? You had to be good to me. I did something for you. Which is a major, major sin. To remind someone of the goodness you do later. I've mentioned this before, but that's why the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, when they would donate, they would never put their hand in this position, because then the person receiving would have to be below them. They would always put their hands like this, so they would be in the begging position, saying that we are the beggars. And then the person receiving would take above them. They always wanted their hand to be above. And this is known about the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And then when the person receiving the money would receive, they would say to them, thank you. they would always say thank you to the person receiving. So it's not just about donating. Look at the heart of the person donating. This is what it means to have pure intentions. And so I'll end with this point, this part of the khutbah. All of this is then found in Surah Ma'un. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one that denies the deen? And there are many possible understandings of this. First of all, they deny the deen altogether. They deny Islam. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off a surah with a question like that, in our hearts, we want to receive the Quran into our hearts the way the companions would have. Imagine, they're sitting with the Prophet ﷺ. I've mentioned this before, but this is so shocking to me, that you get to sit with the Prophet ﷺ, first of all. That's amazing itself. In Makkah, they would risk their life to just go to Dar al-Arqam, the house where the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the companions. They would literally be sneaking through the alleyways of Makkah just to get into the house. One of the companions in Medina was asked, why would you do that when you know you could be killed? They said, how could we miss a night where there were nights that we would enter into that home and there was Quran that had not been revealed, and we would leave that home before Fajr, and suddenly there was a message from Allah. Can you imagine? Are you with me right now? You're sitting with someone, they close their eyes, they begin to sweat, they open their eyes, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ara'ayta alladhi yukadhibu bid-din, and suddenly it's a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the message is starting off with a question. It draws you in. You want to know the answer. Have you seen the one that denies Islam? Another meaning could be, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ, meaning يَوْمَ الدِّينِ. They deny the day of judgment. Another meaning, dain. Related to dain, they deny their debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have you seen the one that denies the deen? That's a very strong statement. So now, if you're a companion, this was revealed in Makkah. This surah was revealed during Makkan period. Okay? And by the way, the Makkan versus Medinan surahs, it doesn't have to do with where they were revealed. It has to do with the time period. So for example, anything that was revealed before the Hijrah is considered Makkah. Even if it was revealed outside of Makkah, on a trip, still Makkan. Anything revealed after Hijrah is considered Medinan. Even if it was revealed in Makkah after the Prophet ﷺ returned to Makkah, it's still Medinan. It's based on time, not place. Right? So this surah was revealed before Hijrah in the early years. So the companions are sitting with the Prophet ﷺ. They are considered to be the believers, even though they, in their sincerity, going back to intentions, they were afraid they were hypocrites. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, anyone that thinks that they are free from hypocrisy and the chance of hypocrisy, that is a sign of hypocrisy. That they're not worried that they may be a hypocrite. The two greatest of the companions, from Abu Bakr and Omar, of course, along with Uthman and Ali, and of the male companions, may Allah be pleased with all of them, they were both afraid at different times that they were actually hypocrites. They questioned their sincerity. So when this verse came down, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ, do you see the one who denies the deen? It would have been very natural for the companions to think that this surah is addressing the Quraysh who are rejecting the Prophet ﷺ. Wouldn't that be your first inclination? If I say to you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us a message, where this is a message to us, by the way, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, have you seen the one who denies Islam? Is our first instinct us? No. But then look at how the surah unfolds. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. They're the ones who repulse the orphan. Okay? Wait a second. It's not talking about theoretical belief in Islam. This could be something that we could all be part of. We may all be accountable for not doing enough for the orphans and rejecting the orphans. It goes on. وَلَا يُحُدُّ وَلَا طَعَامَ الْمِسْكِينَ. And they do not encourage the feeding of the poor. Once again, in some of our mindset, Islam has become so theoretical that to reject Islam means to say, I don't believe in Islam. Here, it has all to do with actions. Not theoretical belief in our brain. Not just what we say in public. It has to do with how we act. And it has to do with how we're acting as it relates to other people. Now, this is the part that I want to focus on. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. This is actually very harsh in the Quran. When you say woe, we translate it as woe, but it's almost like a curse. Right? When you say فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, it is woe to who? The worshippers. Not woe to the ones who don't worship. Woe to the ones who are worshipping. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking with strong language towards the people who are praying. They are the musallin. Why though? Just like we spoke about, for those who are just entering, that the Prophet ﷺ described the bankrupt person as the one who enters the Day of Judgment with a mountain of good deeds. Their entire life, when they had a choice, they chose obedience to Allah. But they didn't do any of it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person is praying. But what's the description of their prayer? الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. That they're lazy in their prayer. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. And they're doing it to show off. وَيُمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. And they don't take care of small kindnesses for other people. There are 3 states that are being described. Even someone worshiping could be spoken of harshly. The way they could be almost cursed because of 3 states. First, their conviction to their prayer is lacking. There's a beautiful saying by Imam Ali radiallahu anhu, who said that when you pray, when the prayer has just come in, then you are praying for the happiness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are you with me? When you pray, when the prayer has just come in, you're praying for Allah's happiness. And when you pray at the end of the prayer time, you are praying for Allah's forgiveness. It's like you're asking Allah for forgiveness for not having prayed earlier. But they're lazy in their prayers. And then when they do pray, they're praying for showing off. Remember, I said earlier, you could have 3 people feeding the poor. One is getting sins because they're looking down on the people they're feeding. The other person is getting some good deeds because they're doing it with a generally good intention. The third person has such beautiful intentions that every action they do has hundreds of good deeds. And when you see it happening from outside, you cannot tell who is who. If we were to say, you guess which one is the one that's receiving the most reward, you may guess the one that is receiving sins. They may be crying, they may be saying, MashaAllah. Externally, they could be doing whatever. Allah knows what's in the heart. So here, they're praying, but they're showing off in their prayer. And finally, they're not taking care of small kindnesses for other people. How does that connect? Their prayer is not transforming them. For a lot of us, Islam can become more information than transformation. We can do all of the practices of Islam. And the interesting thing is, the reason we have to be careful that we're not just acting externally and not internally is that many of us are not even practicing Islam as much as the hypocrites of Medina. If we think our actions are enough, the hypocrites of Medina, who are in the lowest of hellfire, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned them. All the hypocrites, including them, are in the lowest of the hellfire. They were praying 3 times a day in the masjid. That was just to fake that they were Muslim. It's like, oh, I don't have the energy to go to masjid. They had the energy just to fake that they were Muslim. That's how much energy you had to put in. And the only prayers they missed was Fajr and Isha because there was no electricity, so no one could tell who was in the masjid. They would skip those. Dhuhr, Asr, and Maghrib, the hypocrites are right there in the front, pretending to be Muslim. But their prayers just increase them in their misguidance. Their Quran that they would recite publicly, they wanted people to really believe they were Muslim. The Quran did not enter their hearts. So the question is Islam transforming us? Do our prayers transform us? Does the Quran enter our hearts? Is our private life better than our public life? My father taught me that when I was a kid. He said, if you want to know if you're sincere, just see how you are acting when you're alone. It's very simple. I never forgot it. When you close the door late at night, maybe you have your phone, maybe you don't, no one is around you, that is where we are with Allah. Everything else is a show. Everything else is a performance. And Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and we are merely actors. And a lot of our Islam is a show. But what is real is how we are when there's no one else around. So if we are one way in this group, it could be good company has an effect on us. That's true. But it could also be that we are acting that way because people are watching us. It's very easy right now in front of all of you for me to present myself a certain way. But my wife and my newborn baby know who I am more than any of you do. That's why I get uncomfortable. I was at the McLean Masjid and people come with a certain level of praise after a khutbah. And they'll say, Masha, like that type. And I don't think we should praise people for giving khutbahs. I really don't. I think we should make dua for them. The reality is, if I don't live up to what I'm saying, I am lower than everyone in this room. I have no status. I remember Imam Suhaib Webb gave me advice once when I was young, and he saw that I was getting some leadership. And I was so tired at one of these conferences that I had fallen asleep on the couch. And he came up to me and I saw him and I opened my eyes. I see Imam Suhaib coming up and he whispers in my ear. He says, your days of little sleep and loss of sincerity have begun. But then he said something after that. He said, don't think that being in front of all those thousands of people makes you a leader if you're not praying tahajjud. And he just walked away. It's like, this doesn't make us anything. Right now, if I'm not sincere, if in my heart right now, and just to give you an example of how this could work, putting myself in that shoe. If right now in my heart, my intention is to give a khutbah that people will think is good. And so that someone will say something positive. Another thing my dad taught me. When I started, he saw me getting a little more well-known with my speeches. And he said that when someone comes up to you to give you feedback, if in your heart you're only hoping is positive feedback, you are not sincere. Do you get what I'm saying? Sincerity is really subtle. Sincerity is really subtle. And that is why we do not know who in this room is the reason that there's blessing on this community. We have no idea. And so often it's not the person that has the platform. There's just some sincere person in this gathering who makes dua, and when they make dua, the rain comes down. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke about that person. They're oftentimes the unknown people. The Prophet ﷺ said about that person, he said, beware of the man, it could be woman too, who walks into a room and no one notices them. They're in that room and no one notices them. They leave that room and no one even knew they were there. He says, beware of that person, for it may be when they put their arms up to pray that there is no barrier between them and heaven. And when they ask, Allah responds. This person, this is the part I'm adding to this from a different saying. This type of person will end up on the Day of Judgment. And the angels will surround them. And the angels will say, oh fulan, oh so-and-so. And this person will say, how do you know me? When I am unknown. I was someone that was not someone special in this world. And the angels will say, but you were special with us. So many people are celebrated on earth and are not celebrated in heaven. But there are so many people who are not forgotten on earth and are remembered in heaven. And there are people who are in both, could receive both from a gift. Like the Prophet ﷺ received both. It is so hard to tell in this world where we are at with Allah. And I know for a fact, there have been older aunties who have come to me just recently in Ramadan and said, please make dua for my children, you give talks. I was like, I need your dua more than you need my dua. Because this is a deen of sincerity. This is a deen of intentions. Actions are fine. But the reality is they're not sincere, rooted intentions behind them. Those actions mean nothing. They are like rootless trees. And we don't know who are the people of Allah. One of the reasons we're supposed to treat everyone well. It doesn't matter. There may be someone who's like, I don't, my prayers are like this, and I'm not like dressed in a certain way, and I don't have the beard, I don't have this. And that person is closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was a companion who was a drunkard. He was drinking in Medina. I'm saying this stuff not to say, I can drink and I'm Muslim. I'm saying this to be realistic about what happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This person was a great companion. We know his name. He's not Abu Bakr, Omar, Fatima, Ali. When I say great, I don't mean one of those companions ever drank after it was forbidden. That's not true. But this companion was still close to the Prophet ﷺ. He was drinking. And some of the companions said, what a mess this person has become. They drink in front of the Prophet ﷺ in public. And the Prophet ﷺ said, don't speak to him that way. He said, by Allah, I know this person loves me and he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Sharia is important. This is not to diminish. The rules are important. But the reality is, we also have to be very, very focused on our intentions. We have to be very focused on the state of the heart. And then naturally, if someone is sincere over time, just like with this companion, our actions will also be in conformity with our heart. But actions will not be enough. Let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us sincere hearts that are always directed towards Him. Ask Allah for forgiveness for His own. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I'll end with a story that I've once shared with some of you before, but it's a story that really had a deep impact on my life. About 10 years ago, I was with a scholar in Allentown, Pennsylvania. His name is Sheikh Yahya Rodis. And he was telling me, he said, do you want to meet someone that's like a companion of the Prophet ﷺ? Right? And I said, of course. And he introduced me to someone from California. His name was Sulaiman Yassin. He now lives in Atlanta. And for sake of time, I'll keep this very short. This man was like a companion walking on earth. He had lived a life similar to Malcolm X. He had been shot before he was Muslim 4 times in the leg. He drove himself to the hospital. He then went to prison, spent years in prison, San Quentin, one of the toughest prisons in the country, became Muslim in prison, and then just transformed. And one quick story with him, and this is something I want to give something very practical that will help us to align our intentions. 2 things. First of all, he would literally write down his intentions for everything he would do in the day. He had a book. If we went to a dinner party, I read this. He would write 20 intentions for going to that dinner party. Just to a friend's house. I'm going to walk, I'm going to make dhikr, I'm going to enter with the dua for entering a home, I'm going to eat halal food, I'm going to pray in the congregation, I'll be respectful to my elders, I'll be merciful to the children there, I'll make dua for the house, all of these. I won't speak, I won't raise my voice above the hosts. All of these intentions. So every action of his became spiritual. So it was not like, and this is the last point, so please stay together for this. It was not like he had his non-religious life, and then the end of the week he would go to the masjid for a halaqah. His entire life had become worship. And every action was given 20, 30 beautiful intentions. And I can't help but believe that that was the state of Fatima radiallahu anha. That was the state of Abu Bakr. And of course the state of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not just that their actions were amazing. Their actions were great. Their intentions were incredible. And we can now, it's not just about bad or good intentions. We can add layers of good intentions. It's like adding layers of light that unfolds with every action. And then on the day of judgment, we will see what we intended, not just what we did. And in a world that is obsessed with actions and trophies and quantifiable results, let us never forget that Allah is concerned with the state of our hearts. And there may be people who do much less in terms of actions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts them. And there may be people who do great actions without great intentions. And may Allah give us both. Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. La yukallif Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Laha ma kasabat wa alayha ma iktasabat. Rabbana la tu'akhidna in nasina wa akhta'na. Rabbana wa la tahmil alayna isran kama hamaltahu ala alladhina min qablina. Rabbana wa la tuhammilna ma la taqata lana bih. Wa'fu anna waghfir lana warhamna. Anta mawlana fansurna ala al-qawm al-kafirin wa aqimus salam.